formula was a formula based on common sense, based on deficits, based on how we've been treated over the years. Brazil, as an example, has been not good to us, not good at all.
Well, that is President Donald Trump with his latest move on Brazil, just to get everyone up to date, up to speed, after threatening an additional 10% tariff on BRICS countries on Sunday, that is this weekend. President Trump last night announced that the standard levy on Brazilian exports to the U.S. will be 50%. That is effective at the beginning of August. This far exceeds markets' base case of a 10% tariff, plus the sectoral tariff already announced. Trump's letter to President Lula justified the actions with topics ranging from the legal situation of the former president, decisions of the Brazilian Supreme Court, and far from reciprocal and very unfair trading relationship. There is a Section 301 investigation of Brazil, which was also initiated according to the letter which was sent across. Remember that Brazil's total exports to the U.S. account for about 1.9% of GDP, while 53% being manufactured goods, 28% agricultural goods, and the remaining oil and derivatives. Responding to the announcement, Brazilian President Lula da Silva has said that his country will respond with reciprocity to Trump's tariffs, citing a recently adopted Brazilian law that authorizes the government to take proportional countermeasures. In fact, in a social media post, Lula said, and I quote, "Brazil is a sovereign country with independent institutions that will not accept being lectured by anyone." Following Brazil, the total number of countries targeted under Trump's renewed tariff campaign has reached 22, as earlier Donald Trump unveiled a fresh round of tariffs on several more countries, escalating his push for what he describes as fair and reciprocal trade terms for American goods. The latest measures impose 30% duties on imports from Sri Lanka, Algeria, Iraq, Libya, along with 25% tariffs on Brunei, Moldova, 20% tariffs on the Philippines as well. The question that we are really asking today is this: should we see the tariffs imposed by President Trump on Brazil in light of Brazil being part of BRICS? Well, that's, Brazil is the founding sort of members of that BRICS grouping. President Trump, of course, has strongly stated that just being part of this BRICS grouping will bring additional tariffs. What does this mean for other BRICS members as well? Are BRICS a factor for tariffs for India as well? Going to be a factor at least. Let's get JPMorgan's Jahangir Aziz to actually answer some of these questions. He is our guest today. Okay, well, Jahangir, great to have you with us here on the program. Thank you very much for joining us. Was Brazil hit with 50% tariffs due to being part, due to Brazil being part of BRICS, the B in BRICS, Jahangir? That's my first question to you. Plain and simple.
Look, I mean, there are several, competing factors which you can point to as to why Brazil was given the 50% tariffs. I mean, if you look at the letter by itself, it had three different reasons. Two of them were about domestic politics in Brazil, and one of them was about the fact that, Brazil still has very high tariffs on goods that they import from the U.S. But clearly, that was also the case on April 2nd, when Brazil just got, 10% tariff. So there's things that are not just related to economics, but things related to politics, which is directly mentioned in the letter. And, there could be other geopolitical things that are associated with it.
Jahangir, do India and China need to be worried on account of being part of BRICS in terms of, additional tariffs, as President Trump has said, punishment for being part of BRICS?
Look, I mean, so far, this has been something where, he has dealt with, or the U.S. has dealt with India separately, with China separately. They have some sort of an understanding with China. My guess is that they have some sort of an understanding in the making with India, which is why no letter has been sent to India. South Africa has already been imposed a tariff rate. So I think the BRICS, even though people talk about it as a collective, I think people are dealing with it, or the US is dealing with it differently. Brazil, the B and the I and the C and the S have all been dealt differently, and we'll wait and see, what happens to Russia. Clearly, what will happen to Russia as, tariffs isn't going to make much of a difference because there's no trade that is taking place between Russia and the US. And that could be, it's been, there's been, bills being placed in the Congress as we speak about additional sanctions on Russia. So I think even though it's a collective and we think about it as in the same breath, and the U.S. has talked about BRICS in the same breath. I think if you look at the actual, reaction to different countries, they have been very, very different, and they need to be different.
Jahangir, I spoke with Jim O'Neill yesterday. He coined the BRICS acronym. His point was that if anything, Trump basically mentioning Trump, BRICS again and again. Trump mentioning BRICS again and again is giving BRICS too much importance, often unwarranted importance, because, as a grouping, it's not really done anything. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, look, these countries, while, Jim O'Neill obviously, made the acronym, and for a very long period of time, almost 20 years, we traded BRICS, or we traded EM as an asset class. I think these countries have become big enough or mature enough with very idiosyncratic economics, very idiosyncratic capital flows, very idiosyncratic policies, and obviously very idiosyncratic politics, that they are seen by the market as separate entities, and the way the market trades is not as EM as an asset class or BRICS as a bloc. They trade them as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa separately.
The India-US trade deal, Jahangir, seems to be kind of stuck. It was not going to be smooth in any way, but it now looks like it's tougher than ever before. And the deal that we're talking about is not a full-scale deal. It is like an agreement, like an MOU. Do you agree?
Think about any typical trade deal. We've talked about this. So the the India-UK trade deal. It was about 3-4 years in the making, right? Trade deals take a very long time. There are very, very intricate issues that need to be dealt with, and to expect some sort of a trade deal to be done in a matter of 3 months' time, in the first place, was over optimistic. Now, what we might get is some sort of a framework, some sort of an understanding, but to get a trade deal in the way we think about, or the way we are used to thinking about trade deal, I think that's going to take a very long time. Clearly there are issues between India and the US where things weren't supposed to be smooth sailing, and they are most likely not smooth sailing. Agriculture being clearly one of the biggest stumbling blocks. And that was something that was, thought about even before talks had started. And my sense is that is probably where a lot of concern is on both sides.
Jahangir, allow us to take a quick commercial break here. But that soundbite of Jim O'Neill, the man who coined BRIC, and the interview that I conducted with him yesterday, I just want to play out for our viewers some portions of it. O'Neill was scathing. He essentially lashed out in a way at President Trump, saying, well, he wonders if, President Trump even knows the countries which constitute the BRICS grouping. Listen into some of those sound bites, take a break, and we'll come back with Jahangir on the other side.
Each time Trump says something about the BRICS, I'm both amused and even more confused than I am when he talks about many other topics. I sometimes wonder whether he actually really knows who's part of the BRICS and who isn't. In my judgment, the BRICS haven't really done anything. So I'm not sure Trump's statement ultimately is going to mean one thing or another of any great relevance, other than the fact it gives the BRICS greater attention. which I would have thought is the last thing that Trump was trying to do, or should have intended. But such is the strange world of life under Donald Trump. And this is a contradiction inside Trump's head. Clearly, he doesn't like the idea of people talking about the dollar losing its reserve currency status, but he's presiding over policies which effectively invite investors all over the world to search for alternatives to the dollar. These inconsistencies about applying very aggressive tariffs all over the world, expanding dramatically their own domestic fiscal deficits, and somehow then worrying and making aggressive statements about remaining the reserve currency, it's again certainly amusing, but full of inconsistencies.
Welcome back to CNBC-TV18 Prime. You're with us here on the Global Reset. We're in conversation with Jahangir Aziz. We're talking, of course, about BRICS, Trump's threats as far as the BRICS grouping is concerned, but we're also talking about trade and tariffs. Jahangir, thank you for waiting. The deals that we were talking about, right? I mean, what we've seen are like memorandums of understanding. What we saw with UK, with Vietnam, and other countries as well. I mean, they're posted on social media. Proper deals take years, as you also said. So even with this, there seems to be problems in getting to some sort of an agreement, a broad agreement. Contentious issues can be pushed down the road. But even in a limited framework kind of view, what do you think are the sticking points here?
Right. And I think that the basic issue, the stumbling block is, in the case of India, most likely is certain sectors which are very sensitive and cannot be brought into a generalized view about, look, it's going to be 20% tariffs on everything, right? Or 10% tariffs on everything, and India will have X% tariffs on US imports across the board. Simply because in the case of India, there are certain areas where it matters far more than in areas where it doesn't matter that much. Luxury cars, you can bring down the tariff on luxury cars. Not very many people in India can afford luxury cars made in the US, so it is not really going to bother, or it's not going to really affect the Indian economy or the automobile industry in India. But agriculture is a very sensitive topic, and I'm guessing that the Indian delegation have raised this as something where you can't just impose a blanket tariff on everything, because it really matters for vast majority of the people in India, and it obviously clearly matters also for the US. So I think that you can say that why isn't there a one-page letter or one-page agreement the way it has been done with the UK and other countries, but I think the fact that their time is being taken, people are talking about it, people are not jumping and saying here's a one-pager that goes out and that's the deal with India, means that at least the Indian authorities have been able to make headway with the US authorities in forcing them to talk about details. And I think it's a big plus that it didn't take place with Japan, that didn't take place with Korea, it didn't take place with the UK or other countries, or with Brazil, as we were talking about.
Jahangir, have your tariff expectations from Trump changed after what we've seen in terms of all these letters go out? Have you sort of put pen to paper and made changes in terms of what your expectation really is in terms of how this plays out? What's your sense?
No, I mean, look, in the sense that, look, if you're going to try and make sense of every possible deal with every country, it's not feasible, right? So the way in which we have been looking at is that, okay, what is the average tariff rate in the US, averaged across the imports that US makes across different countries? Now, after the de-escalation, it's around 14.5%. Over the last 2 days, I would say it's been added roughly about 1 percentage point higher. Brazil's trade with the US is extremely important, but for the US, Brazil imports are not that big that it will move the needle. So it's probably moved from around 14.5% to about 15.5%. Our view had always been that these tariffs will eventually settle somewhere close to 20%, made up of reciprocal tariffs of the way we talk about these countrywide tariffs, somewhere between 10% universal and whatever was announced in April 2nd, and an extension and expansion of the global sectoral tariffs. And you've already seen that being expanded to copper. There's been a threat of being expanded to pharmaceutical, semiconductors. They haven't spoken about it in a while. But in our view, those are all areas where this can be expanded to. And if you take the sum of all of that and take the average, it's probably closer to 20%. So that's the first thing. The second thing, there is, in all of this midst, we still forgotten that on July 31st, the Federal Appeals Court start hearing arguments on the appeals for the lower court judgment that IEPA, which is the basis on which all of these tariffs are being imposed. By all of these, I mean these countrywide tariffs are being imposed, which they ruled that was inadmissible. The appeals court will start hearing on July 31st. So we know there's an August 1 deadline, but there's a July 31st beginning of a hearing at the Federal Appeals Court, and we do not know how the Federal Appeals Court will do. It might actually, right now there's a stay on that order, but it might actually uphold the order of the lower court, in which case all of these tariffs, again, become inadmissible. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. So even while we are talking about, average tariffs moving from 14.5% to 20% or close to 20%, there is a lot of uncertainty as to what can be done or what can't be done and how long it will take.
Okay, Jahangir, that's very well put. The other big issue, right, and I think it's a bit of a black swan kind of a possibility, probability, whatever you want to call it. The Fed chair, Powell, right, clearly taking a lot of fire from President Trump every other day. It is, of course, no one's case, but it is possible, actually, let me ask you, is it possible we see a replacement or a so-called shadow Fed? This, even as Fed Chair Powell's term only ends in May of 2026. I mean, an appointment announced now down the line, which kind of undermines Fed Chair Powell's authority. How will the markets take it? What probability would you assign?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the Federal Reserve is, de facto if not de jure, but de facto an independent central bank. These are not the first time that, U.S. administration has pushed on the Fed to move interest rates in one direction or the other. The Fed has basically been able to hold its independence throughout this period, and I think that while we do understand that the appointment of the Fed chair is a big deal, and clearly it is a big deal, I really don't think that between now and that point in time when the new Fed chair will be announced, the Fed's independence is going to be, affected in a way in which it affects its actual policy-making abilities. That we don't think so. I think these attacks or these push, will heighten in intensity. You've seen that in the congressional hearings, but I think that's about it. I don't really think that you're going to see materially any dent or any impact on the Fed's ability to conduct its monetary policy in the way it thinks it should be conducting it.
Will financial markets, just my last question to you, Jahangir, react in a different way to all of this in the second half of this year? H1, first half, has been super in a way. Markets have been unbothered. The S&P is, at an all-time high or very close to it. What's your sense?
That has been the biggest puzzle, right? Where there is, all sorts of survey indicators, etc. Whether you're looking at PMIs or whether you're looking at household surveys or looking at establishment surveys of various kinds. The uncertainty on business is very, very high. At the same time, there is clearly a move where the rise in rise in tariffs will have to be passed on to consumers. I mean, right now, most industries are essentially, absorbing much of the rise in tariffs in their own margins, and we shall see the first. The glimpse of it in the earnings report, and the earnings season starts this week. We will see that how earnings has been affected. There is clearly, while the labor market remains on the face of it, quite strong, 147,000 last month, which was significantly higher than what the market expected. If you look at under the surface, if you look at private sector non-farm payroll, it was one of the lowest we've seen in a while. It was just 74,000. So there are signs that things are not going the way in which at least the overall numbers are showing up. And our sense is that, look, there was this shock about the tariffs. People reacted to it. There was a front loading of it. And all that we think is going to happen is that things are going to get delayed and pushed back. And probably instead of a second half slowdown, you'll probably see a fourth quarter slowdown.
Well, it's a puzzle, isn't it? But we'll see and track this as it comes. Jahangir, thank you very much for your time, as always, here on the program. Really appreciate it. Well, it's a wrap on this edition of the Global Reset with me, Prashant. Thank you for staying with us. More coming up after a quick break.